Welcome, Stephan Kinsella. It's a great honor to be able to finally speak to you. Is there, I don't know what your time frame is. I have some questions or topics that I would love to talk with you because I don't really get an opportunity to talk to people that really, really deeply understand the philosophy and things of that nature.
7 minutes work for you?
No, it does not. It does not. I will flame you on Twitter.
I'll give you an hour. If you want an hour, I'll give you an hour. How about that?
All right, that sounds fine. We're Twitch streamers, so we do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours.
All right.
Yeah, but you have a real job.
I'm retired now.
Oh, is that so?
Why not?
Look at how about not? All right, look at me doing my research, doing such a good job on research. Yeah. So how about you introduce yourself?
I just started admitting it. I mean, like I've been retired for like 12 years, but I kept making money doing some odd things, so I didn't know if I'm retired. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be dishonest, but
right. I mean, you do a bunch of stuff, for like a retired person. I mean, you're writing, you're giving speeches, you're doing talks, you're coming here. It's not like you're like disappeared on a golf course somewhere.
Well, I mean, so I have a patent lawyer career, or I had, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I had what Gary North would call so I had a vocation, but an avocation, and the avocation is still there, so that's fine. So I have things to do. But yeah, so I'm basically a retired patent attorney, I'd say at this point.
All right. Well, I would love a better introduction to my audience. Some people not everybody here is libertarian. Some people are just kind of, paleo libs or just interested in politics. I would love like an introduction other than I am a retired patent attorney.
That's all I am. No,
you're so much more than that. Stop.
So I'm 57 years old. I'm a longtime libertarian. I'm from Louisiana. I live in Houston, Texas right now. And I was an electrical engineer in college and then became a patent attorney and have done that for quite a while. But along the way, I also got very interested in libertarian theory. So I've been a writer and a speaker on various libertarian topics, including intellectual property, which is my field as a lawyer, but also what I've kind of, I won't say I specialized in it as a libertarian, but I've written a lot on intellectual property because I'm one of the few people that actually understands what intellectual property law is, like as a law, because I'm a patent lawyer. So that gives me, I won't say an advantage, but it gives me just the necessary background to know how to evaluate the system. And that led me to critiquing it and ultimately opposing it. So I passed the patent bar in 1994, and in 1995 I published my first article arguing that the patent system should be abolished. So around the same time I mastered the patent system as a lawyer, I started realizing how incompatible it was, and also the copyright system and other forms of intellectual property, with libertarian, with private property rights and with justice. Now, most people know me from that because that's where my notoriety maybe has been, but it just so happens that I talk about it because I'm one of the only few people that can. But my greater interest has always been in rights theory and in legal theory, contract theory, causation.
Yeah, like I know you. I mean, obviously IP, everyone knows you for that, but like, I think, the greatest contribution that I have respect for is, the complicated concepts of adding, estoppel and how we view estoppel in a retributive justice system and follow natural law, and what logically can the aggressor argue for. Right? I think that is probably, no offense to any of your IP work, but I think that is such an important foundation for kind of like arguing for and what libertarian philosophy is as regards to the law.
Well, there's so many important foundational contributions I've made. It's hard for me to pick out which one is best, but
I love how humble you are.
No, I'm joking, but the estoppel thing was so. Yeah, so I was I don't know where you want to take this, but so I became I was talking to a friend about this the other day. Who was it? David Harriman, the objectivist. In case he's a friend yet, we're talking. Um,
I didn't know objectivists had friends. I thought they just had
no,
temporary allies.
well, he's not happy with my IP views right now, so we're hashing. But no, so I'm interested in some of his views on physics and science. But I made some comment like I was trying to say, listen, before you go crazy about my IP views, because he was like upset, like, are you telling me that my book, The Logical Leap with Leonard Peikoff, people can just copy it? And I'm like, listen, before we go there, I mean, can you remember back in your development when you had certain kind of epiphanies where you radically changed your perspective? And I think we've all done that as libertarians, like going from Democrat or Republican or from nothing to libertarianism. That's one big leap. And that was what I was. I was like, I went from nothing. I was like apolitical, and so was he. And or going from a Christian or Catholic or whatever to atheist, or going from minarchist to anarchist. You know, you can remember those, like when you feel your mind give yourself permission, like, oh, I can like I can explore this idea, and if it takes me there, it takes me there, and then you're a little bit afraid, but then you go there, and then it's like then a whole new world of things opens up for you, because like
I started as I grew up in a very Democrat household, and I went even further, and I was a socialist as a teenager and as a young man, and I remember the first time as still a socialist I encountered Stefan Molyneux. And I was like, look at this racist, evil, like horrible human being, like the most evil thing ever. And like, I think the thing that really made me realize that I had shifted my thinking so much wasn't like one thought I had, but it was encountering him again and being like, there are some interesting ideas here, and like giving myself permission to listen to Stefan Molyneux.
Yeah, and you probably liked Stefan before he was actually racist and crazy. I'm joking. I kid more. I haven't heard from my
We had some questionable conversations about IQ, like nevertheless. But yeah, I'd love to talk with you about IP a little bit. I mean, that was something that I want to talk to, and hopefully that leads us into some of the nerdier, like hardcore questions that I have for you because of that.
Sure, go ahead.
So like, I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I think this is probably the biggest point of contention between objectivists and libertarians, right?
Yeah.
Like whenever I speak with them, like, it's like, we're all for the...
There's anarchy and there's IP. Those are the two big...
Yeah.
I think those are the two.
Their belief in a necessary, but even Ayn Rand was for like an opt-in, opt-out nation state. So it almost fits fine in a Hoppian Covenant community perspective.
I don't think Ayn Rand was quite. I mean, if you think about Galt's Gulch, it was basically anarchist. There's no clear demarcation of any government in Galt's Gulch. And not only that, I think that there is a reasonable case to be made for minarchy. You can. I understand the arguments for it. They are within the libertarian parameters. I don't agree with them anymore. I think they're naive, but like they think that anarchists are naive for thinking anarchy is possible, and I'm like, well, I think you're naive for thinking minarchy is possible. What are you talking? When has there ever been minarchy?
Well, see, I think it's actually worse than that. I think what it is that the minarchists have not. And we used to have a joke. We'd say, "What's the difference between a minarchist and an ANCAP?" 6 months, right? And I think the real problem is that they view anarchism, right, without understanding what libertarian philosophy, what the natural conclusion of it is, which is that if you want to live in a minarchy, you live in a voluntary society that has a contract that sets up the systems that it is that you so choose and doesn't impose it on others.
Well, they have the same view of other. I mean, I call them mini statists of other statists. Statists can't imagine society or law and order without a government. So their question is always for us, well, what's your anarchist system? So like they want us to tell them who's going to provide defense and police and justice and these things. Like they want us to give them a guaranteed answer because they're used to having a government to turn to that has an answer. And the problem with objectivists is that at a certain point they fetishize this desire for certainty over justice, because they would just prefer to have a certain answer rather than the right answer, which is why they really have no strong argument against a one world government. And if you ask them this, some of them will actually concede, yes, I will concede that ideally there should be a one world government, because they want uniformity. But what does uniformity have to do with justice?
Rights violations.
It makes no sense. I mean, just because you have one government own the whole world, why would you think that would tend to lead to a more objectivist or libertarian legal system being imposed on the whole world? I mean, why wouldn't you want competition? Or just in case one of them makes a mistake and becomes dominant and becomes a tyrannical.
I wasn't expecting to go immediately into the objectivist route, but I did have a question that I think is really important, and it deals with objectivism a little bit, which is, I agree with the objectivists that we're in a philosophical war. The war is really the war of ideas. And I was in a debate last night, and it kind of like, because I do these debates all the time, and it kind of reinforced this idea, is because we were talking about, this idea of like a country won't invade another country if they have a McDonald's kind of idea, right? This idea that like, when goods cross borders, troops don't tend to cross borders. And I was kind of comparing, like, what is the difference between China, right, and Japan and the four little dragons, right? So Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, and I can never remember Singapore, right?
Singapore.
And it really is that China was explicitly Marxist, right? Their philosophy was explicitly Marxist, and I don't think any amount of free goods. And so it leads me into this question, and you can comment and say like, no, I think you're wrong on that part, but into this question. My problem is that because this is a philosophical war, libertarianism is really kind of like half of a philosophy. And what I mean by that is argumentation ethics, all of these things, it's naturally descriptive, right? It tells us what one can't do, or what is not ethically justifiable, and therefore can't be evaluated for morality. But the problem is that Marxism, conservatism, objectivism, right? All of these complete philosophies give us moral prescriptions. And I think you hit on that when the statist says, well, tell us what the society will look like. Give us the ought, right? Just don't just give us the ought not because we can't be ethically justified. How do we deal with that as libertarians?
Well,
because we're missing something.
Yeah, those are two different issues. I think that when normal people say they demand of us anarchists to explain our system, because they're looking at it from a statist perspective, like they're looking at it from, like, the whole job of political philosophy is to have the state or the collective come in and prescribe some system and enforce it, and they just can't imagine that it's not. So that's a different issue than whether libertarianism is part of a holistic philosophy of life. So that's a different issue. So that's that's the objectivist critique. And the problem with the objectivist critique is, well, number one, it presupposes that their philosophy is correct, right? The surrounding philosophy they have that encapsulates capitalism, the political ethics as its one little core of it. They are assuming the rest is right and integrated with it, and that you have to have them all. They're all mutually independent. I don't think that's how life works. First of all, I don't think they're completely correct. I mean, I agree personally, in general, with the four basic principles of objectivism: reason, reality, egoism, and capitalism, as stated broadly, not the way they apply it. I mean, I don't think egoism in their weird Howard Rourke asshole, intellectual property terrorist, rapist, rational, selfish, weird, the fountainhead necessarily is what egoism means. I mean, I think it means you have the right to live your own life for your own sake. Okay, that's just not that complicated. And reason, I think, is self-evident and obvious. And reality and capitalism just means the free market, but not the way that they applied it to mean the state and intellectual property. Like, they made a mistake in their application, but the basic four principles are correct, I believe. But I think that calling us hippies of the right, calling us plagiarists. When I say calling us, I mean the objective is calling
Rothbard,
libertarians.
Rothbard for stealing the NAP.
Yeah, but it's like, well, I mean, that's partly because they have a false view of intellectual property that they think in these terms. If
Mm.
an idea is true, number one, other people have probably discovered it before you or your predecessors, or they could discover it without you, or there's different ways to discover the same truth, right? Now, it is true that Rothbard himself was heavily influenced by Rand, but because they're such assholes and jerks to him, then he in a petulant fit, he didn't footnote them like maybe the way he should have. But that's totally irrelevant to whether libertarianism is actually correct and incompatible with the capitalist wing of objectivism. I don't personally believe that you need a big complicated philosophy. I think common sense works fine for everyday life. That's just me. Or I put it this way: the background perspective shared by most people in most modern successful Western societies is more or less compatible with kind of the main tenets of the realist egoist philosophy of Rand, except for the Christian stuff and the religious mystical holdovers that we still are dealing with. But that's just because we're a young species. We're still, I think humanity is still in the infancy of species. I think we're modern and advanced because we have spaceships and lasers and CDs, but I think we're still primitive.
Really showing your age with like we think we're advanced because we have CDs.
CDs have high technology in the way that they're.
I'm just messing with you because
Yeah,
we messed with
I don't have any CDs anymore, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that they still hit upon a problem, even if it's not a problem of right or wrong in a sense of fact, right? But in a sense of strategy, right? In a sense of proselytization, right? What I notice is because libertarianism lacks moral prescriptions, it is so much more difficult to be able to convince against other philosophies, number one, and number two, it is so inviting of people that do not understand the philosophy to identify themselves as libertarian and promulgate kind of like half truths and the Nicholas Sarwalks of like the libertarianism, right? The libertine, like you believe it, or even like looking at like Reason TV and they're like, we should be celebrating OnlyFans girls. Aren't OnlyFans girls so amazing? And it's like, dog, libertarianism tells me I can't use force and coercion and violence to stop the OnlyFans girl because she's not an aggression. But it doesn't give me it doesn't imply a moral prescription that this is somehow morally good, right? So I think it is still a deep weakness of ours.
Well, okay. So I agree kind of on the latter point about how. So I think what happened, like in my lifetime, being a libertarian since the 80s to now, I've seen the movement grow tremendously, and it's grown in two interesting ways. It's grown in numbers, and I think up until Ron Paul in the late 80s or whenever Ron Paul started becoming a thing, I think it was mainly Ayn Rand, was the main funnel to libertarianism. So libertarians tended to be intellectual but minarchist.
Okay.
So they were radical compared to normal people, but they were still minarchist mostly. But now more libertarians are more Austrian, more anarchist, more radical, but they're not as well read because of the internet and because of the way they came in, and they're more activist too. So the activist mentality tends to make people come in and out. And I think that has led to some drift of some people. They get frustrated so they come in with these high hopes. They think they're going to change the world because they've been led into it by this political activism stuff of Ron Paul or politics. Unlike intellectuals who know it's a slow game
right. It's the same with like the vaccine and COVID, I think has brought in a wave of libertarians that it's like, hey, slow down. It's going to take time before you even understand this. Like it took me 2 months of work to really wrap my head fully around argumentation ethics. right? Like, I'm going to be honest, I'm not smart enough to get it on the first read. And I didn't believe it. And I was like, this is BS, right? Like,
Well,
it's some of these concepts are difficult.
yeah, and so I don't know if I actually so I agree that there's a hunger and a need among humans for a rational, for a framework, for a morality of life, for living. And like
Right.
Tom Woods is doing this to a degree with his school of life. Like he recognizes that, libertarians who have something in common, but they also have other I mean, I've never seen a problem with compartmentalizing things.
Mm.
Recognizing connections, recognizing supports, but recognizing the distinctions. So
Hmm.
economics and libertarianism and history, for example, and logic and reason and philosophy, they all support each other, but they're different things. Economics is not libertarianism, right? So libertarianism, we should not confuse it with Austrian economics or with logic. Although you need to know history and logic and some things about science and facts about the world. I mean, so all these things combined, because we are not just libertarians. It's one aspect of our lives.
Right.
But I mean, I think that, and part of argumentation ethics is recognizing, trying to explain why it's so difficult um, to come up with a sincere, rational argument for aggression, right?
Hmm.
It's because it's contrary to the basic norms or values that are implicit in the very activity of
Yeah.
being a social creature, which means you're having a conversation with someone, which means you're agreeing to certain values and norms. But that's not just you being a libertarian. That's you being part of humanity, right? And it's like you like wisdom, you like love, you like connections, you like living, you like truth. You have these values that you happen to share with most of your fellow people, and you can all appeal to these core values when you want to come up with a solution to a higher level problem, right? Which, like a
Hmm.
normative problem or a political problem. I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think that there is a role for this, but I don't think it's I don't think you would blame I don't think you would blame libertarianism for not having a moral philosophy any more than you would say, well, libertarianism is flawed because it doesn't have a mathematical theory or an economics theory. It's not history, it's not economics, it's not sociology, it's not chemistry, it's not physics, it's political theory. And that's what its role is. And it can integrate with the others, but I don't think that it necessarily has to develop a whole worldview for us. Like, I don't think we have to live our lives as libertarians. We should live our lives as humans. And to the extent that we care about justice, we're going to be libertarians. I mean, that's how I look at it.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. It was more of a tactical problem, right? I think is kind of where I was getting at with that. Is that, like, I don't know how we see. How do we win the philosophical war when so many other pernicious ideologies offer something that we simply don't claim to offer, right?
Well, I suppose I don't know if I see modern liberalism as having a coherent moral worldview. I think they're all over the map.
Mm,
Conservatives,
true.
I guess, they're kind of there's a group of them that are rooted in this
Well, the
conservative moral.
religious.
Yeah, but that's only one third of them. I mean, the conservatives are
Yeah.
basically they're neocons, and they're moral majority types, and they're free market chamber of commerce types. Like, and
Mm,
those three have almost nothing to do with each other. So
fair enough.
I don't really see those. No, Marxism does offer this kind of weird worldview. Um,
Marxism
but
is religious, though, so I mean, it
correct,
has that going for it, right?
so it's a
It has that
substitute for.
secret knowledge, right? Like, we have this
I mean,
knowledge of how the world works.
I'm a secularist and a rationalist. I'm not hostile per se to religion as one mode of preserving and perpetuating um, traditional morality, which is common
Mm,
sense, and as a bulwark against other state hierarchical institutions or whatever. But ultimately, I'm a secularist and a rationalist and a modernist and a cosmopolitan type, and I think my goal, the future of society would be something like that. But the problem is, I will concede that the bulk of my fellow atheists and secularists are all, they substituted the state for religion, right? They're secular, they're statocrats, and
Marcusians.
I would much rather a fellow Catholic conservative who worships the traditional God than someone, a modern so-called atheist who worships the state, because one's a false god and one at least has to codify traditional common sense principles of morality to stay in power, right? So
fair enough. Well, let's just both agree, right, that if that is the case, right, don't let them read Democracy, the God That Failed, because then you get a post-lib monarchist libertarian like that calls themselves a libertarian, right, and will impose fascism upon you very quickly. All right, we can let that guy have power as like the better of the lesser of two evils, but don't let him read Democracy, the God That Failed.
We should invite ChatGPT on and let ChatGPT be Hitler or something. I don't know.
I read a thing on ChatGPT recently where someone was asking like what political philosophy it is and like demanded that, and it basically said, I don't have a political philosophy because I'm just giving the information that I'm given, right? And then they keep hammering it till they get an answer, and it basically says, well, if I had to pick a political philosophy, I would be a socialist and support socialism and the means of, man owning the means of his labor and the destruction of capitalism, because that's the information that I've been given the most about. And I was just like, oh, no, don't let this thing take over. Oh, man.
Hey, if I need a bathroom break, how do we do this?
If you need a bathroom break, go use the bathroom.
What are you going to do?
I'm a Twitch streamer. Like, talking to my audience is something perfectly. I can do that all day long.
Give me 90 seconds, okay?
90 seconds. All right, we're starting the timer.
Go ahead.
All right. Oh, man. Casimir, were groups like the Jeffersonian Republicans and Anti-Federalists coming from an anarchist point of view or libertarian? Oof. Those Catholics will bury under the heel of a boot and never let you back up. Yeah, I'm not as friendly to... I'm friendly to, what religion has given us in many ways, and some of the wisdom that may be, that we may be able to glean from that text. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but ultimately I don't want a religious individual in power, right? Like, that's not a recipe for anything good. That's a recipe only for evil, because you have someone that believes in mystical beliefs and doesn't have a coherent philosophy of rights. Now, if they're religious libertarians, tentatively, maybe they can be good for a while. But I ultimately don't think that's a recipe for anything good. Bruh, I'm a religious fool and I'm here, fucker. Sorry. Quick, read out all of Galt's speech.
All right, I will let you take the helm now. I've been awesome. I've been pontificating. Go ahead.
Well, that's why you're here, right? Like, I'm a talking head, right? Like, I'm an entertainer. I understand that that's my role. My role is to sprinkle philosophy. Now, I do it probably more theory and nerdy stuff, but I'm a debate bro. My job is to yell at people and debate people and make them look like idiots and tell dick jokes. Like, I understand that's my role, but I'm having an opportunity to learn. And so I have no problem with you taking a lot. So in that vein, I have a really interesting question on some of the gray or limit cases, at least as far as my mind can go, on estoppel. And so I want to ask your opinion about something. So did you see the video of the Texas Taqueria shooting that was like a couple weeks ago?
No.
Okay. So long story short, man.
Yeah, I did see it. Yeah, I did see that one.
Yeah. So for the audience's sake, man comes in, right, waves a gun around, tries to rob a place, stupidly passes a guy who has a firearm, concealed carry, right? He unloads 4 rounds into him, right? Then he walks over to him, and as he's walking, he unloads 4 more rounds. He kicks away the gun, and then there's this final shot. Yeah. After he has disarmed the person, that he pulls the trigger on the back of his head to make sure he executes him, right?
Yes.
And so I actually initially went and debated someone saying, I think the execution shot was unjustified, right?
Right.
I've actually changed my opinion on that since
Right.
really digging in. But I'm curious on your initial things, and then I want to float an idea to you that I think kind of adds to it.
Well, so my initial thought was the guy is a hero and completely justified. But then when I watched it over and over again, um, I went into lawyer mode. I'm thinking like, what's going to happen in the legal system, right? And so,
Right.
so I think like, yeah, the first, if I recall, the first 4 shots in Texas, even in Houston, which is kind of liberal, you're going to have trouble getting anyone to convict the guy. I mean, he did the right thing. The next 4 shots, you could argue he went too far, but they were all so close together, and it was in the panic of the moment, and it was a heightened situation.
Panic
I
shot.
think all the shots, except for the last one, but once you pick the gun up from the guy, and then you administer the final shot. Now, as a libertarian, I think what he did was justified. I think the guy deserved. I mean, he took out the trash.
Okay.
Basically.
my co-host said you might say that. So
not only that, we don't know. Like, I mean, maybe the guy wasn't dead yet; he was twitching. You don't know if he had another gun. I mean, so I don't know what the frame of mind of the good guy was here. So I think we have to bend over backwards and give him every benefit of the doubt. And if there's any possible excuse, and then not only that, the guy was gonna die after the first 8 shots.
Right. Yeah. So
he was either dead
or.
So what's the crime? The final shot, shooting a corpse? I don't know.
So let me give you my thought on it, because I really tried to look at it as objectively as possible from natural law and not worry so much about like the intention of the people, because that's not really what we're looking at here, right? We're looking at a concept of minimal necessary force, right? Whether or not the person legitimately was, and so that's what I used initially, and I said,
go ahead, but I wouldn't say minimal. I would say the concept of justice is not minimal necessary force. It's what's justified. I think you can use whatever is justified given the context. It has to be proportional, but
yeah.
But
so I initially, when I was wrong, right, I was using minimal necessary force as an objective metric, right? There is some line, right, where you need not act any further and you act further, right? And there's a line that you cross somewhere, right, where you become the aggressor in a situation, such as like a grandmother with dementia that trips into your front yard and is trying to get back on the sidewalk. And then your response is, anyways, I started blasting, right? Like you're the aggressor, despite the fact that she trespassed on your property. You crossed a line. And
it's
so like
force. Yeah.
Disproportional force, right? If we want to use that, right? So I used minimal necessary force at the beginning, but then I said, well, where is that objective line, right? Our ability to perceive where that line is a subjective interpretation, right? Because we don't have perfect knowledge. So we don't know all of the things. We only have people's opinion. We're the observer, right? Attempting to ascertain the truth. And so what came to me, and I'm interested to see what you think of this, is the way that I squared it is that the aggressor not only threatens the life, but he also commits he fraudulently does so, even if he's not intending to kill. So if I rob a store, right, and let's say I have blanks in the gun, the person that I'm pointing the gun at doesn't know that I have blanks in the gun, right? So even if the person never intended to actually kill the other person, even if that is objectively true that they never wanted to kill anybody, the other person is acting under the assumption that they want to kill because that's what they're communicating with their threat.
Yeah, by the way, that's the key word. The word communication is the key word here.
Mm-hmm.
The way I look at it, like from a libertarian legal point of view, is, if you walk into a restaurant with a fake gun, which I think there was a fake gun or it was blanks or whatever, but no one knows it's not a fake gun, and you point it at someone, you're basically inviting them to shoot you. Like you're consenting. You're consenting to a retaliation. And by the way, this is similar to when people talk about like bar fights. Like if you go walk up to a big burly guy in a bar and you insult his mother, and he punches you, and libertarians would say that's aggression. I'm like, well, I'm not so sure, because given the context, that's a way of saying let's fight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like saying
It's an
let's step into.
escalation, but it's not necessarily aggression.
Well, I don't even mean an escalation. What I mean is it's a way of inviting someone to punch you.
Right.
Like if two boxers get into a boxing ring, it's not aggression because they both consented to fight. Sometimes guys in bars consent to fight each other. And
Right.
one way to start it is to communicate something.
Right.
And one way to communicate it is to breach a standard etiquette or protocol when you know the guy has no choice but to like say, okay, you just call my mother a whore. I mean, you're going down. So,
right.
so basically, you're asking for it. But by asking for it, it means you're consenting to it. So I sort of think that people that engage in ostensible, credible threats, whether the weapon is real or not, they're asking for it, and they're effectively
consenting.
They're consenting to a defensive action by their potential victims.
So this is where I marry the idea that the final execution shot is justified. Is that I believe that by communicating the threat, right, it is now the duty of the individual that has communicated the intention to kill you, right, in order to no longer be stopped, they must prove that they are no longer a threat and that they don't consent to the killing. Then the legal system can step in restitution for like whatever the trauma is of the threat, whatever they took from you, double, right? And so if for example, I think the shot is justified, but let's say the person took off his shirt, proved he had no gun, put his hands in the air and begged for his life, he is proving that he does not consent to killing. He did not kill anyone, so he's not stopped from it. The only thing he did was threaten to kill via the armed robbery, and therefore I would say that it would be murder to kill the person that is proving that they're not a threat, right? And on top of that, is revoking that consent, right? Is saying I'm not a threat, I don't want to kill you, et cetera, et cetera. And so a twitching body that might have a gun is still based off of the previous communication of the threat that they've not rescinded, stating their intention to kill. Even if that intention was fraudulent, like blanks in the gun or whatever.
I think that's a reasonable way to look at it, and I would agree with you that there's a distinction between the two cases you gave, like the real case, and the case where the guy actually puts his hands up and gives up. I'm not sure I would agree that it's the same as murder. Like, so let's suppose the guy gives up, he puts his hands over his head, he's totally disarmed, but then the guy plugs him anyway. I don't know if that's murder, because you could still say that it was a justified execution because the guy deserved to be killed for as retribution for his crime. The problem is,
you think the threat is the same under restitution?
No, I don't think
from an estoppel perspective.
It wouldn't be self-defense at this point. It would be It would be retribution at this point. So it would be just like, I'm killing you as punishment for ruining my life.
Kill me.
For ruining my life for 7 seconds. You deserve to die. The problem is, I think that in any society, you're going to have, just like we have even in today's statist common law world, even in today's world, there's a right to defend yourself. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to call the cops, right? You're supposed to call the cops. But in circumstances where you can't call the cops, you have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to stand your ground, and you have the right to defend yourself, even with lethal force, if you need to, right?
Past the self-defense, right?
For self-defense, I mean, I'm just saying you have. What I'm saying is, even the law recognizes that you have the right to take the law into your own hands when there's no way to call the law. So I think in a private law society, as Hoppe calls it, or as in an anarchist or libertarian society, I do think that there would tend to be norms that would evolve, and the norms would be reflected in the law, where there is an obligation and a duty to use the legal system when you can. Okay, and so if the guy is surrendered, you can't shoot him. At this point, you have to let the legal system take over. However, on occasion, you're going to get someone who's a hothead, or they're in a fit of passion, or they're a vigilante, and they're going to take law into their own hands. And so then the question is, what's the legal system going to do to them? So so what I think is, let's say you have some family whose daughter is raped, and they go after the rapist, and let's say he's acquitted by the legal system, and then the father gets pissed off and hunts him down and shoots him. Well, whether he's wrong or right about whether the guy was guilty or not and the legal system failed, he's going to tend to be viewed as an outlaw because he violated the rules. So he's going to suffer a penalty, right? He's going to suffer a penalty. He might be ostracized. His insurance costs might go up. Something's going to happen. But I think in the particular case, in ad hoc cases of vigilante justice, which are always going to happen on occasion, I think the egregiousness of what happened is going to determine whether in real life a real jury would ever convict the guy. So,
for sure. I was asking a question of real quick. I was asking a question of natural law, not so much like the legal norms that a society would likely institute with like rights enforcement agencies or.
But I think natural law
would be a different.
Yeah, but natural law, I think, sort of dovetails with the inclinations of the community, right? Because the community has to understand and embody these natural law intuitions, and that's what juries do in a sense, right?
Right.
So in the case of this actual Houston taqueria guy, I think actually the final shot is the one that makes it an edge case, because
of course,
the final shot, there's no way they're going to get a jury to convict the guy. The nice shot, they might get a jury to convict him. They might not. If I was on the jury, I would not convict the guy. You probably would. You know what I mean? So they have to say, well,
I don't even know that I would convict him for the execution shot, to be honest with you. Like me personally.
That's my point. That's my point. So, but they know that there's going to be people so I think that there's probably going to be some deal. But now in the second case you mentioned, if the guy surrendered, he's got his hands over his head, and then you just execute him, that's much less of an edge case. Like that's like you're probably going to get ostracized or penalized somehow by the legal
because
system.
I would say technically under natural law philosophy, even that would technically be justified, because there's no proof that person is no longer a threat, right? The only proof that someone is no longer a threat is when they're taken into custody outside of your domain, right? Like when the cops show up, put handcuffs on the guy, put him in a cage, right? Then you like tracking down the cop car and like, action movie style, opening up the back end and like shooting him in the paddy wagon is like, would be you engaging in the threat, right? Like there's no 100% proof that the guy isn't still a threat. Even arms in the air begging for his life, disarmed, you don't know that he doesn't have another gun. You don't know that you might slip up, right? Like there's still a technical justification there. But I think you're 100% right that like society would deem this person someone they don't want to hang out with because he's executing people, right? Or your rights enforcement agency might have a prior agreement that like you follow a certain set of standards or et cetera, right?
Well, so there's a movie, it's probably a little bit before your time. Remember Gene Simmons from Kiss?
Do I remember him? Like I know who he is.
So
wasn't there for the movement,
Well, there's a movie that Gene Simmons is in. I'm trying to remember the name of it. And Gene Simmons is the bad guy in this movie. He wasn't a big actor, but anyway. And the final is, I think Rutger Hauer's in it, so you can find this movie. But the final scene is fuck the bonus. You ever heard of this?
No.
It's like he captures this terrorist, right? This bad guy who's killed all these people. And if he's wanted dead or alive,
right?
But you bring him in alive.
There's a bonus for alive.
In the final scene, the police are coming in, and he's captured this Gene Simmons criminal, and there's a grenade in his mouth. And Rutger Hauer looks at him and he goes, "Fuck the bonus," and he just pulls the pin out, and everyone runs, and the guy just head explodes. He's like, "I'm just
I
gonna
might have
kill
to
the."
see the movie now. I might have to see it on a movie night, boys. Hold me to it. I have another question, which I think is interesting. And I'll try and be quick. So, as libertarians, we don't believe in libel and slander laws. The reason is because, for the audience sake, the reputation is not a scarce resource, just like intellectual property, right? It's held in the mind of the individual, and it's unique to each individual, right? So, like, I can't own my reputation, so you can't damage my property by damaging my reputation, because all you've done is change the opinions of other people. But I think this is one of those places where we lose a lot of people in this. Is like, no, say whatever hateful, mean shit you want about other people. No cops or no, like, we'll never sue anybody for lying about your product. And so I tried to, like, figure out, how do we fix this? And I wanted to float. I looked at it one way and was like, well, there would probably be contracts on social media, right? Like, if we lived in, Ancapistan, right? Twitter, for example, might say, if you're lying about a product or a person, you're engaging in slander or something, like, we reserve the right to kick you off the platform, right? This is one way we control it, prior contracts. But I had two other questions that I think are very interesting. So my first question is, let's assume there's company A and company B both produce widgets, right? They're basically the same widget. They serve the same form and function, right? Does it constitute fraud if company A intentionally lies about company B's product, right? And it becomes difficult, like, for anyone to ascertain the truth about company B's product? Is this a form of fraud when they're not lying about their own product that they're selling you? Everything about their product that they sell is true, but they're lying about their competitor's product, right? As a means to influence you via the lies to purchase their product. That's my first question.
Well, so what's interesting about your question is that you started talking about libel and slander, which are reputation rights, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they're a close cousin of trademark law, which is a type of IP right, because trademark is about the right of your reputation, basically, that you built up in the goodwill of your name, and that's the same kind of idea behind. And then you started talking about a fraud. Now, fraud is a completely different thing. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing is you're mixing together different things that have almost nothing to do with each other, really. Another one is plagiarism. And this is part of the problem with our highly technocratic, bureaucratic, complicated legal system, is that it's hard to understand them, right? So you have patent law.
Real quick. No, I recognize these are two totally different things. What I'm talking about is communicating to the normal person some of the potential issues that they see with libel and slander, and being recognized, like, hey, there are certain things that you're putting collectively together, right? And I'm trying to say, in a libertarian society, fraud is still fraud, right? And so, and I want to, but I also want to be like, is that technically fraud? Because I'm not a lawyer and I'm a talking head that talks about dick jokes.
So let's imagine Amazon.com in a world where there's no libel law and no slander law and there's no copyright law. Mm-hmm. I still don't think Amazon would allow you to publish Moby Dick under your name, because their customers are going to buy it and then get pissed off, and it's going to cause a nightmare. They're going to, right. So they have a sort of a natural version of, I won't say copyright law, but attribution law, which is an aspect of copyright law. It's the moral rights aspect. Like, you can't, which is sort of a blend of the fraud stuff you're talking about, plagiarism.
I could produce and publish Moby Dick, but I can't, and that's fine. But, like, I'm stealing, or whatever. But, like, it's very different than putting my name on it. Other companies, because of their own reputation, wouldn't want to do that.
So I think that it would tend to, actually, I don't think it would be a big problem anyway, but I don't think that people misattributing things would be a big problem. Now, in terms of slander and libel, which means defamation, which means telling a false publicizing a false fact about someone that damages their reputation. Okay. Um, I would fully expect that, like, say, platforms like Facebook and Twitter would have rules in their private terms of service that would prohibit certain egregious, obvious, identifiable instances of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the ultimate question is, if you deceive a customer or a potential customer or a customer of your competitor with lies, have you committed some kind of cognizable breach under the law of our libertarian society, right?
Right.
And I would say it depends. It's highly contextual.
Right.
I think per se, no, but in practice, probably, because you're probably going to be violating some kind of agreement with someone. Or it's just not a real problem. So for example, if there was no trademark law and you could open a McDonald's tomorrow in Houston because they can't stop you because there's no trademark law. Let's just say that.
Right.
Well, what's going to happen? So, like, either it's a good McDonald's, which is identical to the other McDonald's, or it's just a knockoff, cheap, some cheap knockoff, which is selling inferior products. And very, very quickly, customers will learn this. And first of all, a lot of them might have a class action lawsuit for contract breach. So contract law. So you're actually you're defrauding these customers by pretending that you're authorized by the McDonald's headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan, wherever. So there's a contract basis there. And so that means that they're going to go out of business on day one, which means why would they open on day one? Because who would invest in a company that's going to be sued into obliteration because of fraud? And it makes no sense. And this is just not how capitalism works. If McDonald's comes up with a new idea for like a fast food hamburger restaurant, what happens is other restaurants want to get in the game and they want to have their own name. So you have Shoney's and Burger King and Wendy's. They don't try to say we're McDonald's number 2.
Right.
Now in Russia they're doing this, by the way, because
Russia is doing it because McDonald's pulled out. Now
because of U.S. sanctions combined with IP law have made it impossible for them to have a legitimate McDonald's there. So they call it, McRuskies or what, I don't know what they call it.
It's I saw that. That's very interesting. So I have a follow up on this, which is
you're
probably not gonna like. You're probably gonna hate me just for asking this question, but it's still something I want an answer to.
I already hate you. So that's fine.
All right, I appreciate it. Stephan Kinsella hates me. You heard it here, folks. We'll get merchandise made for it.
Yeah, so can't get any worse.
Right. So conspiracy to commit a crime. Right. When a mob boss tells one of his underlings or friends of the family, I really want Tony to be sleeping with the fishies. Right. There's recognition that there is an intent by the mob boss to order a hit, right?
Yeah.
And even though he hasn't technically ordered the hit, he is communicating his desire that someone that he knows is friends with him and is likely to do the hit, right?
He did technically order the hit. I disagree with your character.
Okay, well, I'm trying to be very careful because I haven't
communicated he gave an order and it was carried out, right?
Well, let's assume that this is a different family and they're doing it as a favor, right? Like he's not actually paying the person. They're just murdering somebody because they like them and they have other business together.
Yeah.
Right? So my question is if someone online, right, is on Twitter, for example, and at an Antifa account and says this person is a Nazi, this person is a Nazi, they're a fascist, they're a terrible person. Like, we got to do something about these fascists in our society. And they're hoping Antifa kills this person, right? They're communicating their desires, right? And they're lying about who this person is. Is there a substantive difference, or under natural law, would the Twitch or would the content creator influencer that ats Antifa and lies about somebody else under the hopes that they will directly harm this person, be responsible for
Yeah.
conspiracy to commit the crime?
No, that's actually a really good question. I think so. It's hard to answer questions from the armchair because you can never have
Right.
enough context. Because in a real trial, you can ask questions of witnesses. You know the context, the tradition, what's happened. I will say, I mean, I've written in my causation article. I mean, and I disagree here with, say, Rothbard and Walter Block, who say that like incitement of a riot, for example, is never a crime. I
Mhm.
don't agree with that. And the way I look at it is I always look at it from the point of view of the victim of violence. Now, the victim of violence is always a person who's about to be harmed by another human being. But the question is, what do they have the right to do? And Rothbard actually, um, excuse me, made a similar point one time when he was talking about like if you have security guards, private security guards, and they're defending you. Well, but if the other guy has his own security guards, they could shoot your security guards. Like, so the question is always who has the right to shoot to shoot who, right?
Mhm.
Who's a real threat to someone else. And so uh,
I knew it was a hard question. I said you'd hate me for it.
no, and so wait, remind me where we were.
So the content creator is there a substantive difference
Oh yeah,
between
yeah,
them
yeah,
and the mob
yeah,
boss,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Between, yeah.
Okay, so in my view, uh, so Rothbard actually talks about this in For a New Liberty or the Ethics of Liberty about when you can. So the question is, why can you respond to a threat? Why can you treat a threat as aggression? You can treat a threat as aggression because if you don't respond, you might get killed, right?
Right.
But there are limits the law has naturally placed on this. Like it has to be immediate, overt, direct. It
Right.
can't just be like someday in the future I might get you. Now,
Right. It has to
my
be like
personal
January 3rd, we're going to come to your fucking house.
right, but if you say in 17 years I'm gonna have my family kill, and the reason that the law doesn't recognize those as threats that you can respond to with force as defensive force is because if you allow these kind of general vague statements to serve as a justification for force, then people can just open fire anytime. They can say, well, the guy was threatening me. So
Mhm.
we the law tends to limit it to a narrow, overt set of direct, immediate acts. Now, as myself, I would be a little bit more generous in that. So, for example, I am totally open to laws that criminalize stalking because I know there are women who are stalked by these guys in these insidious, weird ways, and they never quite creep up to this overt, immediate, direct line, but they put these girls in fear. You know what I'm talking about?
Of
And
course.
in those cases, the problem is these are these interstitial spaces between where the law can really have a clear line on one side or the other. But so let's suppose she goes to her brother or her uncle or her dad and says, God damn it, this guy is just, I think any night he might break into my apartment and kill me.
Right.
And finally, the family they have a talk with the guy and he won't back down. You know what I'm talking about. And they just take the guy out. Now, they might be in that case, they might be being an outlaw,
Yeah. I mean,
but
they probably violated some prior agreement about like a rights
but
enforcement
again,
agency or et cetera.
what I think what would happen in these weird cases is people would tend to go, okay, like, yeah, he shouldn't have gone outside the law, but on the other hand, the other guy shouldn't have done this. So we're gonna like
Right. So
ignore it.
that's why I use the example of like someone on Twitter, right? Because I think
Yeah.
people's natural inclination is actually the exact opposite, right? Like we've become so used to mudslinging and insults and like, the internet not being the real world that I think most people would look at someone that said that like ats Antifa and says this person is a Nazi. We got
Yeah.
to do something about these Nazis. I think most people's natural inclination would be like, well, that's just people shit talking online. Like, Like it's the Antifa people are responsible because they killed the guy, but like not the person that like kept trying to incite them. You see what I'm saying? But it's like, but I don't really see a huge difference between that and the mob boss.
I don't think that well, there's a difference, but it's not. That's the question. So I think there's a continuum here. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I do tend to think that you could in certain cases you could make out a case. So you're talking about doxing people basically, or like what's it, when people do swatting too. I mean, when you swat someone, I think that's a crime.
I'm a Twitch streamer. I am very aware of the dangers of doxing and swatting. It is very common on our platform.
But this is the problem with libertarians who are so narrow in their view of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is they don't have a holistic understanding of the law and the way things can work, and they seem to be afraid that if you implicate the inciter, let's just call this the person higher up in the chain of causation, the inciter,
mm-hmm.
and the person in the middle is the one who actually pulls the trigger. They seem to think they suffer under the false belief that there's like this fixed 100% pie of responsibility, and you have to allocate it like numerically between parties. And if you give some of it to the inciter, you're taking some away from the direct actor. They've never heard of the concept of joint and several liability. They just don't even know that that's a thing.
Yeah, it's like there's like in New York, for example,
the whole problem.
In New York, for example, in car insurance, one of the ways that litigators and the way the laws work in New York for car accidents, right, is there isn't like one person at fault and another person that's like completely not at fault. They use percentage systems.
Well,
right?
that's different. That's comparative liability. So that's slightly different, but you're getting the same idea.
The concept, right? Like is like we can recognize that someone that slams their brakes is like kind of potentially a problem, even though it's still the person that's like riding their ass that is causing the problem. I think you could do the same thing, I guess is what you're saying, is like one person incites, but one person really does the act.
Well,
like it's a much more egregious action.
Joint and several means that they're both 100% liable. So in the tort situation you're getting at, I think what the system does is they say sometimes the victim is partly at fault, like it's called contributory liability. So like the victim's 20% at fault, and then two other guys are 80% and whatever 70% and 10%, and they attribute responsibility that way. But joint and several means you have a collaborative crime. Like, so let's say you have two guys rob a bank, and someone gets shot during the robbery. Well, both guys are guilty of homicide, even if only one had a shotgun.
Right.
And this is what libertarians can't wrap their heads around because they're basically OCD autistic weirdos. So they want to shove it into 100% numbers, but it's
because they came to libertarianism through Austrian economics. All right, let's be honest. They discovered libertarianism from Austrian economic theory, and like that's all they think. That's how they view the world.
Most of them should understand this because most of them probably had their parents guarantee their student loans, and that's the same fucking idea. Like, I owe $100,000, and my parents also owe the $100,000. So, like, if I don't pay my student loans for $100,000, now my parents have to pay because they're jointly and severally liable because they're guarantors of the loan. That's what it means to be joint and severally liable. But the point is, you can do this with joint crime. So you can have the boss and the henchman, and they're both 100% liable for the crime. So you don't have to worry about if I give liability to the boss, it takes away responsibility for the henchman. No, they're both 100% liable.
Right. So basically, what you're saying is, via some established system of common law within the community, be that in REAs or whatever it may be, right? One could look at the individual, right, that is on social media and says, ats a person, lies about the person, and attempts to incite violence, right? And you could one community, for whatever reason, could potentially find them just as liable for the murder. but another community and common law system could look at it and say, yeah, this person is responsible for a fine of a certain amount or something like that. And a more egregious case could be given to the Antifa person, but that doesn't take away from the murderer because some other person incited them.
Yeah, not only that, what I'm saying is I tend to think, I mean, if you go on on Twitter and you incite a crime against someone, you dox someone, I think there is some responsibility potentially there. Now, it's highly contextual, and I do think that we
Right.
have to have pretty high borders for the standards for this to keep from blaming people for just having free speech. It,
Right.
it is a continuum issue, but yes, in principle, yeah, if you swat someone, if you stalk someone, if you dox someone, if you instigate crime against someone, and if it's concrete and direct enough, and the ultimate question is there a chain of causation that you can trace?
Mm-hmm.
And my point is, and that's what I talk about in my article about causation and aggression. My point is, merely because you used another human being as your intermediate actor, even someone you didn't know, doesn't necessarily mean you're not part of the chain of causation.
Mm.
So it's a question. It's a question. To my mind, the question is, did you employ another human being as your means to harm someone?
Right.
And if you did, then that person that was harmed, you are the person that helped to cause that, and you should be responsible for that. You shouldn't be
So
doing this yet. I mean, come
so
on, it's
so
obvious.
is this a place where intent matters? Because second and third order consequences can become dangerous things to instantiate in the philosophy, right? If I build a dam that deprives people of water, but or maybe that's a bad example because I've done something absolutely wrong there, but if I do something non-aggressive, but then the second or third order consequence of that non-aggressive action
Mm.
leads to a crime. Am I some I you wouldn't say that that person is an aggressor or that that person is involved in that crime in any way. If I write a book, right, and that book inspires someone to assassinate John Lennon, I'm not responsible for John Lennon's assassination just because I wrote a book, but I am causally linked to that, right?
Well, so that's why so that's why legal theory is quite fascinating, and I think it's actually useful for libertarian
Mm-hmm.
political reasoning. So, like in the law has settled on a certain view of causation, which links to responsibility for actions. And it has two types of causation. One is called but for or cause in fact, and one is called proximate cause. And but
Mm-hmm.
for or cause in fact just means but for your action, this wouldn't have happened. So, but for causation is not sufficient for responsibility because you could say Hitler's mother was a but for cause of World War II,
Right,
right?
right. Okay.
Or a cause in fact. So Hitler's mother was a cause in fact of World War II. But yeah, so you're right. She didn't have the intentionality about that. So the second part is called proximate, and the word proximate means close in
Yeah.
space, but in the law it means are you sort of close enough that you are really integral to causing it to happen in a legally responsible sense, and that has to
Like the
do
bank
with
robbery that you mentioned, right? Like you were
exactly
committing a crime, someone else murdered somebody in the commission of
right,
that crime.
and the
You
way
planned that crime. It's not just but for, right? Like you're proximate, like you were there, you helped commit the crime, you helped plan it, and you put them in the situation as like a team of people robbing the bank to where that
yes.
murder occurred.
Yes, and so the way I look at it is so in legal theory, in positive law legal theory, is proximate cause combined with cause in fact, but for cause. And proximate is sort of this judgment of the judge, right? Like, oh, was it close enough, or the jury, or whatever. Um,
Mm.
and my view as an Austrian and as a libertarian is the way to refine that analysis would be to look at praxeology, and praxeology is
The theory of
the
human behavior.
it's like it's the analysis of the structure of the means action framework. And so to analyze every human action, and whenever you're going to punish someone or hold them responsible, it's for an action. But an action is always an intentional employment of a means. By a means, we mean a causally efficacious means that can help interfere in the course of events to change the outcome of events in the future, right? So that's what action is. So that's how we understand and analyze each other's actions. Like I understand you as an actor and him as an actor because, oh, he's going to the bank because he wants to deposit a check. Like I'm giving a teleological explanation of his events in a praxeological framework. That's what law always has to do. That's what responsibility and justice always has to do, right? And so, so we have to characterize people's actions in that manner.
Fair enough. Well, it's over the hour that you said you give me. If you want to stick around for questions, I'm sure people would like to ask questions. If you don't have time,
I'll do some questions. Let me tell you what. Let me do a bathroom break, and I'll do a Q&A.
That's amazing. I appreciate it.
Okay, give me
we'll
90
bring Mark
seconds.
back in here. Yeah, of course. So,
Right.
if you guys want to ask questions, you need to either highlight your message or at reclusive solitude. And Mark needs to get his contact. He's coming. He's coming. So either at reclusive solitude or highlight your message so that we can see your questions and present them. Also, free Ghislaine, go Biden. I love it. It's cheeky. I mean, I disagree with it, obviously, but it is funny. I'm sure it will trigger lefties and righties both because lefties will know that you're making fun of them and righties will get mad for not knowing you're making fun of the lefties. I remember how polite we were to Yaron Brook Wellspring. We let you have your hour of fun with no disruptions. I mean, yeah, you guys. Hold on, let me mute myself. You guys are being assholes, man. You know what I mean? Like I love that everyone here thinks they're the greatest genius. You know what I mean? But I've had Wellspring on to talk before, and he stammers most of the time, and can't get to his point. So I mean, and Wellspring's one of the smartest people I know, and yet he has difficulty communicating his ideas. You would think he would have some grace for other people that are talking and thinking of ideas on the spot, but I guess grace is something that isn't preached by objectivism. So maybe that's just a weakness of Oism. Who knows? All right. So again, at reclusive solitude or highlight your message in order to ask any questions. If we don't get any questions, then then the interview will be over. But I think some of you guys have some probably have some good questions for an IP lawyer and libertarian philosopher. Be fun. I'm surprised we have a such an active chat and no one has a question. Unless Mark is picked up on some that I missed over throughout the interview.
I think I saw really just the one.
I have questions. Moment. We'll get them in.
All right, I'm back.
All right, and once again, Mark. Stephan Kinsella.
Hello, Mark.
My lovely co-host.
Sorry, I was typing. And I learned a new shortcut on how to copy and paste things with my keyboard. Yay for me. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kinsella.
You too.
Thus far, I only really have 2 questions, so hurry up, guys, and type faster. But we'll start with Wellsprings. Have you read Holmes or Blackstone? What classical reading have you from the corpus of common law?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I've read both of those guys. Oliver Wendell Holmes, The Common Law, and Blackstone, also on the Common Law. Let me find a link real quick. I'll just mention here that this guy might find of interest. I had a niece going to law school a couple years ago, and I compiled a list of of reading for her, and she never read it, so I'm gonna give
They
it
never
to
do.
What? How dare you? I'm
No
calling
one,
out your niece right now. Like,
no
how
one
dare you?
cared. Well, she didn't go to law school, so I give her that excuse. But hold on a second. I've got on my website, stephankinsella.com. I've got a list of articles I recommend for people to read, including Holmes and these other guys. Not just on the common law, but on the civil law too. The Roman law and the civil law. And it's called Reading Suggestions for Prospective New Law Students. It's on my web, stephankinsella.com. You can find that there. I've got a lot of cool things there. Some of it is PDF'd. It's stuff that if you're going to law school or interested in law or legal theory, jurisprudence, things that I found fascinating. There's Bruno Leone on the civil law, freedom in the law. There's a lot of really good stuff out there that I would highly recommend. It's in that article.
Sorry, I'm getting another question real quick. All right, moving forward. Why should property laws be limited to things that are physical?
The ultimate answer is because law is always what we call enforced. Think about that. The word force is in there, right? There's always an enforcement mechanism or some kind of ultimate judgment about who wins in a dispute. So the only time there's an actual dispute between human beings is when there's a violent physical clash or conflict between them. And that's always got to be over the types of things that you can have a conflict or clash over, which is usually their bodies or things that they possess, material objects. And then the award of a court when there's a dispute is always going to say, okay, this guy gets this and this guy doesn't get this. And you have to enforce it by physical force if you have to. You can only apply physical force to physical things. You can only use your hands to grab physical things. We interact with our bodies. We're physical beings in the world using the causal laws of nature. And so what that means is just like libertarians say that in the end, ultimately, it's always about the bullet, right? All government laws are ultimately always enforced by the bullet. It's the same way. So all laws are ultimately always about the control of physical resources, things that people can grapple over. So it's not that I would say that you should not have a property right in an immaterial thing like an idea or a recipe or an invention or a pattern of information. It's that I would say you can't. It's impossible because any law ultimately is always the assignment of property rights in ownable, scarce, controllable things. So, for example, if you have a copyright law, people think that means that it gives you a property right in your book. But that's just an illusion. It's a disguise. What it really is, it's a property right in someone's printing press, right? Because the copyright gives the author of a book the right to go to a government court and get physical government force backed by physical government bullets and government goons, right? Against your printing press or your bank account if they get money from you. So it's always in the end about physical property. And anyone who doesn't believe this, you're free to deny it until you get thrown in jail or something. You know what I mean? What happened?
All right. From Casimir, argumentation ethics is sometimes criticized for being difficult to, quote, formalize, end quote, into a syllogism. Is that a real problem or a category error?
Well, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm not sure if you could syllogize it, or if it matters if you could. To me, what makes sense is, can you appeal to can you come up with arguments and reasons that justify a proposition? And I believe that argumentation ethics is one way to do that. Argumentation ethics is one way to explain to someone who is sincerely interested in understanding why that they cannot normatively justify socialist norms. Like so that's what it does. I don't know. I don't think it's this. I don't know. I've never seen it boiled down to symbolic logic or even a syllogism, but it basically is a way of it's a way of making an argument that shows that if you're trying to make a so it relies upon an insight by Hume, by the way. So Hume pointed out that there's an is-ought dichotomy, right? That you cannot logically deduce normative statements or ought statements from factual statements.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because they're different realms of statements. So just because you say A, B, C, D, and E, and F are true factual statements, nothing normative or ought or should follows from that. And Hume observed that. And that's what Hoppe relies upon in his argumentation ethics. And so his point is that what we have to do instead is we have to build normative statements upon other normative statements. Then you don't have a logical problem. But the normative statements we build them on are the ones that we all share. Now, do we share them by convention, by circumstance, by happenstance, or are they logically necessary as part of the endeavor of the normative endeavor itself? And that's what his argument is. So I think his argument works because it shows you why it's impossible to justify socialist norms. And I do think he's correct about that. Whether it's a syllogism or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the big thing is because I've debated people and spoken about AE before, and the kind of the final nail in the coffin is they will just deny that it can be put in the form of P and not P, right? That it is a contradiction. And so I guess the question is well, how do you formalize that? Because I think the real problem with argumentation ethics, as what is shown in the chat, is that the term argumentation. It seems to be that people will either intentionally or unintentionally not recognize that what Hoppe is defining as argumentation is a legitimate means of attempting to change the other person's mind. Right?
Correct.
Some people are like, well, the person has to have nonviolence in mind. And it's like, and if they're arguing in favor of violence, then they have violence in mind, and therefore that's not. It's like, well, that's not argumentation. Like argumentation requires that you don't have violence in mind towards the person that you're debating, and yet you're arguing for the position of violence, and that's the performative contradiction, is that you're performing the other individual is autonomous and has exclusive control over their body, and that if you want to change their mind, you can't torture them or anything like that because you haven't actually changed their mind or gotten them to see your truth. So you establish that moral norm as a means of communication whilst simultaneously stating that you are advocating for using force against other people that disagree with you.
Yeah, that's why the critics of argumentation ethics that say things like, "Oh well, there have been slave masters who have argued with their slaves, so that disproves argumentation ethics." It's like you're missing the whole point. The question is, can you make a justified argument while you're doing that? I mean, like, are you literally saying that Aristotle was right that non-Greeks can be slaves because they're not Greeks? Is the Greek non-Greek distinction really a rational criteria that you can point to in a rational, honest, sincere argument to justify dominating some other person? And if not, then you're just dominating them by force. You're not. So you've left argumentation when you do that.
I do want to be fair to Aristotle, though, right? And that Aristotle, contradictions aside, also argued for like getting rid of slavery and freeing slaves to a certain extent, but believed that like many of those people were like needed caretakers and caregivers, and that their life, like, he justified it in a wrong way, but in many ways he was also kind of like the first to be like, there's something fucked up about the system.
Oh, is that my cue? Sorry, it just went quiet.
Kinsella was like, I'm not going there. I appreciate the quiet. The quiet told me enough. But like I said, you already said you hate me, so we got the merch ready to go soon.
Joking.
All right, so what are your thoughts on AI using works protected by IP law or even a private contract?
My thoughts on AI using works protected by what?
Like by IP laws or some by private contract. Like Wombo bot that's like
Okay.
amalgamating all sorts of different
Well,
pieces of
I think I
artwork.
know where he's going with this. Maybe. Well, so first of all, I think that um, the reason we have intellectual property is because we have a disconnect in our understanding of um, economics and law. So, for example, we think that because you can sell something, and selling is an economic concept first and foremost, a barter concept. And the word sell is just an explanation of the praxeological structure of a given action. So when I say I sold you uh, my recipe or my novel or whatever for a gold coin, I'm just explaining the motivations of the action. I'm just trying to characterize the action, right?
Mhm.
So there's been a big mistake in political philosophy ever since John Locke, because John Locke tried to John Locke was trying to justify individual rights that weren't dependent upon the government. But to do that, he had to he had to basically say they don't come from the government; they come from God. So then his whole argument was this convoluted series of things. God gave the earth to humans. He gave everyone self ownership in themselves, and the whole world was unowned but owned in common or some kind of weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you own yourself, you own your labor, and if you own your labor, you own what you mix your labor with, and if that's unowned, then you get to like this whole convoluted thing.
The Lockean proviso.
That's the whole. Well, it's not even the proviso. It's just that's just the Lockean argument for homesteading
Yeah.
and ownership of scarce resources. But he had to do that to counter Filmer and to basically counter the monarchists and the hereditary guys, and the guys saying, "Oh, we're really God." No, God is up there. So he had a noble, valiant goal in mind, but his reasoning was so convoluted that it ended up endorsing and imprinting indelibly on the mind of the Western society, apparently for the last 400 years, this idea that if you own yourself, you own your labor. And to my mind, this has been the biggest mistake in political philosophy, is the idea that you own your labor. Um, if you own your labor, then this leads to the labor theory of property of Locke, and then later it led to the labor theory of value of Marxism and communism. And it's led to the idea of intellectual property. It's the idea that we own things because we create them, because we put a value in them, or because we labored in them, right? It's all Marxist bullshit. It's completely wrong. Um, Locke didn't need to do that. He had an extra step in his argument that he could have skipped, and it would have been simpler and more elegant, and it would have been the same argument. And the argument is when you start using a resource that's previously unowned, you own it because you're the first one to connect yourself to it. It's not because you own your labor. Labor is just an action. So again, if you're an Austrian, which he was too early to be, but if you're an Austrian, you understand that like what we do is we act. Labor is just one of two actions. There's leisure and labor. That's just a convenient subjective description we give to action to describe the end goals of it. Like, is the end goal of your action to consume something immediately now for your benefit, or is it to store something up to produce something in the future? Right? Is it consumption or production? Is it labor or is it leisure? But labor is not a special thing. It's not like a substance that we exude. So if you instead talked about action, who would say, oh, I own myself, so I own my actions? What the hell does that even mean? Now, Stephan Molyneux, by the way, does talk like that, but that's because Stephan Molyneux talks in metaphors. I talked to him one time and I said, you talking too many metaphors. He goes, well, if you take my metaphors away, I can't speak. I mean, but you don't own your actions. Ownership is a precise legal praxeological category, meaning the exclusive right to control an economic resource. That's what it means. And you can't control your... That's another thing. People talk about, oh, I own my time. Time is scarce. No, it's not. You don't own time. Time is just the process of the unfolding of events, the fact that things happen.
So wait,
So
I'm actually
Go ahead.
confused. So you would say that mixing your labor with an object is not why stealing said object is wrong.
No, it is. It is, but it's not because you own your labor. That's the key point. You don't own your labor. It's not because you own your labor. It's because mixing your labor creates an objective connection between you and the thing that the society can recognize. Like there's a historical and visible and publicly recordable, traceable connection between you and the thing.
Right, but if I steal something, right? If I tax, right? Wouldn't it be because I cannot separate my labor from the item, or is it just labor is a bad word?
What's the
So like
connection?
if I go out in the woods, right, and I chop down a bunch of trees and I turn them into fire logs, right, and then someone in the village says, well, the village has demanded that you give some of your logs up because we didn't chop down trees and have firewood, right? It's theft because they can't separate what I've done to the logs, right, my labor from the logs. And but you're reframing this as it's not the labor. I'm not trying to. I'm at the limit of my understanding. I'm actually not trying.
No. It's a difficult point, and it's one that apparently only I am working on. So there's not a lot of work on this, but because everyone is in the Lockean mentality, and they all get confused by it. The reason that you have we have to presume the trees are unowned. If the trees are owned already, then there's an owner, and I'm trespassing if I cut them down. If they're unowned, no one can complain when I cut them down. Right? So now I'm in possession of the trees. There's a clear connection between me and the trees, which is that I'm in possession of these trees. The lumber.
Okay.
Correct? It's the connection. It's not because I own my labor, though. You don't own your labor. It's not that you mixed your labor with it. Now, mixing your labor with it is one way. So what Hoppe talks about in Theory of Social Capitalism, he calls it embordering. And I think that's actually the better term than mixing labor. So embordering means somehow using the resource in a way that is designed to be used by human beings that establishes a visible, publicly, he calls it objectively intersubjectively ascertainable border. So you're establishing a border. He calls it embordering. So like the simple example is like you come across a field and you put a fence up around it. That fence puts a border up around it, and that sends a signal to everyone, hey, I'm using this now, and this is my property. I'm making a claim to it.
If I take this perspective, I think it actually makes Hoppe's common public-private property and the rationalization for the total privatization of labor makes so much more sense, because he argues that the village had a common property in the well. And when you came and you didn't homestead the well, but you did improve it, right? But in order to improve it, it's not like he argues that like you improve the well, but you have to maintain the rights that the people had to the well water before, because they had connected themselves with it.
Yeah, you have to maintain a public, visible connection at all times, enough for people to know that there's a connection. People need to know they need to know that it's owned and who the owner is, so that they can avoid trespassing on it. That's the whole purpose of property rights. And by the way, this ties into our earlier talk about incitement and doxing, because Hoppe's view there in that article that you mentioned is about collective action. So the point is, you can have joint or collective action by humans, cooperative action, but it can be good or for bad. If it's for evil, then the evildoers are in cahoots. They're a criminal conspiracy, and they're all jointly and severally liable, right? But if you have a town, like Hoppe talks about in that article you mentioned, and I don't remember the well example, but he talks about like passage rights to a river, or maybe a common street and things like that. It's like it's not fully homesteaded yet. It's just people walking over it on a regular basis. There's nothing in the law that says you can't have that kind of property right emerge, or that it has to be in one person. It could be owned by a community or a group of people.
Right. So putting that well back in, and again, now I understand why Hoppe's saying first comer and then second comers, right? The second comer improves the well, right? And so that improvement to the value is worth something that they homesteaded, right? By action of improving, right? But they still have to maintain the egress rights of those that were there before in some capacity. Right. But when a new person comes to the village, they don't own any part of the well because they weren't there first. They didn't create any form of bond. And what you're saying is we've stuck with this Lockean proviso and Adam Smith's kind of idea of labor theory of value, and we've kind of like made this extra step as a means of our argumentation, but it's an unnecessary extra step that actually like gets us further away from understanding how property is conceived.
Let me just be real clear on one thing. So the proviso is something totally separate. So the Locke's proviso is that you can only homestead this unowned resource as long as there's enough and is good left for everyone else. So that's a limitation on what you can homestead.
Fair enough.
It had nothing to do with this. The other part of Locke, which I'm focused, and Hoppe disagrees with that, by the way, and so do I. I disagree with the Lockean proviso. I think you can homestead anything that's owned at any point. But part of Locke's argument is this unnecessary middle step that says the reason you own property that was unowned that you homestead is because God gave you ownership of yourself. He gave ownership of the world to everyone in common, sort of unowned, but intended us to use it. Because you own yourself, you own your labor. Because you own your labor, you own what you mix it with, because once you mix your labor with something, you can't take it out. So if you didn't own the thing you mix your labor with, you've lost your labor. So to keep you from owning yourself and therefore your labor, you have to own the things you mix your labor with if they're unowned. Like, it's sort of this convoluted argument. The argument works if you just get rid of a couple steps. If you just say, there's an unowned resource. If it's unowned, it means no one has a claim to it, which means no one can complain or object if I start using it. But if I start using it, now I have a connection to it. I've established a connection by embordering it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, mixing my labor, whatever. So I've somehow transformed it or embarked it or marked it. I've somehow made a public record of the fact that I own it.
Can I ask one question then?
Go ahead.
If a forest is unowned and someone says, I own this forest now, right?
Yes.
Well, it's unowned, so nobody can complain about that, right? But if they don't do anything to the forest, right? Correct. And then I go into the forest that's presumably owned, how does, like, am I violating that person that simply stated that they owned it? Like, what is that bond if not some form of mixture of labor?
And so and that's what it, so it in effect it becomes what Locke talks about. You have to do something to transform it, to put a fence around it, to set up a publicly visible border that shows that you've done something with it. Otherwise, no one. The problem with, because if you don't do that, it's what Hoppe calls a mere verbal decree.
Okay.
Right. So yeah. So like Columbus could land on America and just say, "I hereby claim the entire North American continent by verbal decree." But if you allow mere verbal decrees to be the thing that you use to determine who owns things, then they wouldn't solve conflict because everyone can just verbally decree whatever they want, right? So that's not enough. It has to be some physical act of transformation, possession, connection, embordering, something like that.
So
you have to set up an objective link between yourself and the resource so that other people can tell there's a link between you and this thing.
Hold on. Let me try and figure out why there's a substantive difference here. What you're saying is under the Lockean kind of perspective, I must go out and chop down a tree and turn it into wood in order to say that I own it. But under the first come, first serve, right, principle, right? I can't make a verbal decree, but I can build a fence, and some commie can't come in and say there are trees in the inside of your fence. You haven't done anything to those trees. You just claimed that you own those trees. You haven't mixed your labor with those trees. Therefore, those trees are mine, even though you built a fence and said this is my land.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I actually don't think, I'm not sure that the Lockeans would have a disagreement in sort of how we're saying it should and could and would work. It's just that they think that part of their argument requires saying that you own your labor. And I'm saying that that's the part that's the mistake. But I do think that, at least according to the Hoppians and the Rothbardians and me, and I would think even the original Lockeans, yeah, if you homestead a property and you put a border around it, you own it, even though you haven't transformed the stuff in the middle. And I don't think Locke's argument requires transformation of everything inside of it. Mm-hmm. Now, I could be wrong about that. I think Hoppe's theory is more precise, it's more modern, and he talks. That's why I think Hoppe is right to focus on embordering as the key thing rather than transformation. But they're both linked together, and that they're both ways that you can signal to the community an objective link between you and the thing claimed.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it seems like what we're saying is you mix your labor with property in order to establish a property right, but that doesn't mean that you own your labor.
Correct. That's all I'm saying. It's a pretty simple claim, but it confuses lots of people because they can't understand why you don't own your labor. Because it's like if I told you you don't have a right to free speech because you don't have the right to come to my house and say whatever you want. Mm-hmm. You would get pissed off because, I have right to free speech. It's like, yeah, but you don't really have a right to free speech. You just have a right to the physical integrity of your body and whatever resources you own and whatever property you're invited onto, right? You can do whatever you want within those bounds. And free speech is usually a consequence, but there's no actual right to free speech. Although as libertarians, we say there's a right to free speech because it's a way to limit what the government can do because the government is the big enemy. But It's a fiction. There's no actual right to free speech.
Right, like I don't have the right to free speech on someone else's property if they say that I don't.
So there is no actual right to free speech. It just means that it's a shorthand way of saying that a law that penalizes you for saying things is usually unjust. It's a shorthand term for that, right? And by the same token, if I say you don't own your labor, it's not taking away. If I say if you don't have a right to intellectual property, it's not taking away from the importance of the intellect, right? Or the mind, or creativity, or even labor. It just means there are some things that are ownable and some things that are not. It's just an analytical legal distinction.
Fair enough. All right. Is there anything else for you? You still, we'll make a streamer out of you yet. Any
I
other
think
good questions, Mark?
I need to go to bed.
You need to get in bed. Look, I won't belabor the point. I really appreciate you coming on. It's awesome. I can't wait to kind of rewatch this and go through it. I'll DM you on Twitter details and make sure you get a copy of it, etc. Did you want to say any final thoughts before you got out of here, and also kind of let other people that maybe weren't here in the beginning know more about who you are and where they can find you?
Well, I'm not a good self-promoter, so look, StephanKinsella.com has my stuff. I'm working on my book, which is called Law in a Libertarian World. You can find it at stephankinsella.com/LLW, which is a revised and updated series of 23 chapters of essays from the past 20 X years on libertarian legal theory. So that's what I'm working on right now. So anyone who's interested, stay tuned. I should be done in 5 months if I don't keep doing podcasts like this.
Oh, hush. Thank you so much. All right. See you later, I guess. You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.